Saskatchewan and Ottawa faced off in court this week over the federal government's carbon pricing plan. The case involved 5 judges, more than 36 lawyers, and 16 interveners. Saskatchewan is hoping for a ruling by April 1st, the date a federal carbon tax on fuel is supposed to come into effect. But what happens if the court rejects Saskatchewan's case? How far is the province prepared to take the fight? Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe joins me from his office in Regina. Hi, Premier Moe. Nice to see you.
Great to see you, Bessie.
So, Premier, what action is your government willing to take if the court doesn't make a decision before the federal backstop kicks in on April 1st? For example, are you going to seek an injunction?
Well, there are a number of opportunities that we will have to make a decision on. What we've asked the federal government to do is to do precisely the same thing that they did in the case of the TMX pipeline, is allow the courts some time to make a decision on whether or not the federal government even has the constitutional authority to do what they think they have, to impose a carbon tax on the residents of Saskatchewan. We don't think they do. They should allow the courts ample time to come to that decision.
I had Premier Blaine Higgs from New Brunswick on the show, and he had personally asked the Prime Minister to wait to apply that backstop until the court decision, and he had said the Prime Minister said no very clearly. If that is the case, I just want to be clear, so you're not ruling out an injunction, for example?
We're not ruling out any of the opportunities that we have, and I would personally ask the Prime Minister to change his mind on behalf of the people of the province. There is mounting frustration, namely in Western Canada, but I would say in industries, wealth-generating industries across Canada, with some of the policies that are being put forward, such as carbon taxation, such as Bill C-69. We're seeing provincial elections that are being run on these policies or against these policies. We see the outcome of those elections in Ontario, in New Brunswick, likely in Alberta in the not too distant future. And this is going to be a topic in the federal election this fall.
It's a topic in those elections for sure, but is it fair to characterize them? I mean, are you characterizing them as a determinant in some of the outcomes of those provincial elections?
I would say they're a partial determinant in the most recent provincial elections, and we'll see what happens this spring in a province to the west of us.
We had Mark Cameron, a former advisor to Stephen Harper, former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, on the show yesterday. He now sort of analyzes various policies with respect to carbon emissions. He thought that the outcome of this case would be that your province would lose, but that it would ultimately end up in the Supreme Court. Will you appeal to the Supreme Court if this decision is against your province?
If we're unsuccessful, I think we will consider appealing to the Supreme Court. We think there will be a different outcome here, as we don't feel the federal government has the ability to exercise a tax in certain areas of the nation just because they don't agree with the policy that's been put forward, as effective as it is.
The federal government's argument, from what I have gleaned over the past 2 days, and I'll preface that by saying I'm not an expert in law or environmental policy, but it seems to be that they have constitutional authority because we're talking about climate change, and they labeled the effects of climate change, and of course they're not the only ones to do so, as potentially catastrophic. They also outlined in their argument that Saskatchewan's emissions, according to the federal government, have gone up 10.7% since 2005. Do they not, if they feel something is of federal importance to this degree, like they are saying climate change is, do they not have the authority to act as they have?
Not as per the Constitution, no. Listen, there's places in this nation that have a carbon tax. Their emissions are also gone up over that same period of time. This is the public discussion that has occurred over the last number of months and years with respect to, is a carbon tax an effective tool to actually reduce emissions, and at what cost? At what cost to our economy? At what cost to families' personal finances across the nation? And that's the public discussion with respect to addressing climate change via a carbon tax that we have all been talking about over the last number of months. What we're seeing playing out here over the course of the presentations that were made to the Saskatchewan court over the last 2 days is the legal argument that is not about climate change. It's about the Constitution of Canada and whether the federal government actually has the constitutional authority to wade into areas that we feel are provincial jurisdiction by taxing certain areas of the nation, but not all areas of the nation. And we don't feel the Constitution lays out that the federal government can do that. We have seen these lines in the sand drawn over the last number decades, if you will. I take back to the former Prime Minister Trudeau and the National Energy Program that Premier Lougheed had worked through. The fact of the matter is that changes in our nation come about by these conversations and respecting the Constitution that we have. Changes around language rights, where that has been challenged from the province of Quebec as well over the years. And the changes in our nation always happen by evolution. They don't happen by revolution. And that is why we feel the federal government should respect the Constitution, respect the provincial jurisdiction in this case, and we hope that will be the outcome of the decision of the court here in Saskatchewan.
You spoke about the question that yourself and like-minded premiers like Doug Ford and Blaine Higgs have raised, which is at what cost. Those premiers, Premier Higgs and Premier Ford, have both said that they believe that this carbon tax, the imposition of it, will push the country into a recession. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think a number of policies coming from our federal government are doing just that already. When you look at the competitive disadvantage we have in Canada, you see capital fleeing to places like the United States. We are landlocked, and the cost that it is costing, let's say Saskatchewan, for instance, by not getting a fair price, a world price for our energy products alone.
Well,
never mind
the differential right now is not as wide as
projects.
It was. The differential is much smaller than it was.
The differential of recent reportings is about 60%, the last I heard, not in recent today, but in the recent month overall. So the differential has cost us many hundreds of millions of dollars directly to the government of Saskatchewan, billions to our Saskatchewan economy, and we need to continue to ensure that we can get those outlets for those products built, like TMX, like Energy East as well. These policy decisions are driving our economy into whether it be recession or holding it back. Most certainly, these are headwinds that are problematic for not just the Western Canadian economy. We have Premier Higgs out here this weekend. That's where Energy East would arrive, putting New Brunswickers to work in a refinery in New Brunswick. These are important nation-building projects, nation-building projects that I think you're going to see the Premier start to work together on.
With respect, though, Premier, I'm not asking about all of the suite of policy decisions. The comments that Premier Higgs and Premier Ford made were specifically about the risk that a carbon tax would impose. Do you agree that that carbon tax specifically could cause a recession?
But that carbon tax is causing investment to leave our nation. To what level that leaves, it may cause a recession.
But do you have any evidence to back that up? I mean, so far, economists on the whole, or most of them, seem to disagree with that assessment.
We have a U of R study that says it would cost $16 billion to the economy by the year 2030. We have
GDP of the economy is $2.1 trillion, though.
Not in Saskatchewan.
So your study that was commissioned by the government says that it would cost $16 billion to the province of Saskatchewan.
Yeah, a study that was done by a reputable university, the University of Regina. We have there is serious carbon leakage that is caused by the suite of programs. Again, I say the carbon tax is one program that is very detrimental to investment in our communities, in our industries of mining, of energy, of agriculture here in this province, as well as industries that extend beyond our province to provinces like New Brunswick, Alberta, Manitoba. It's problematic, and it does risk putting us into a recession. You
had very good economic numbers, though, lately. For example, wholesale trade numbers, Saskatchewan's up 10.3% from last year. Saskatchewan manufacturing sales are up 10.7%, the highest increase among all provinces and well above the 2.7% posted nationally. Are you exaggerating the concern?
No, we don't have a carbon tax here right now. We're not operating under Bill C-69. We're operating under an environment where we've just had $20 billion of investment in our potash industry to not only increase our capacity, but to increase our sustainability in that industry.
But you said that the federal government's policies were driving investment out of the country.
Well, they are, and if they pass, if Bill C-69 passes, that $20 billion of investment would not have been possible here in Saskatchewan, and that is a very good example of how Bill C-69, if it is passed in its current form, would potentially hurt any further expansion in the potash industry here in the province of Saskatchewan. How do you know that it would that project would not have gone through if Bill C-69 had passed? How do you know that? because we work closely with our potash industry, and there is concern with respect, not just in that industry, but other industries, of the impact Bill C-69 will have on further expansions of those industries.
Environmental impact assessment agencies in Canada, though, have a history of giving the green light to projects. In fact, I think they've only given the red light to 2 projects.
We've had various to varying results here in Saskatchewan, and along with the green light, often come a number of caveats, if you will, or points that need to be met. Our concern with Bill C-69, and I think it's becoming evident, as we've saw a major proponent walk away from a project, Energy East, just with the conversation of Bill C-69 and its open-ending in relation to timelines that are there, the very real concern that we have already seen investment leave this nation, not even because of the introduction of Bill C-69, but because of the conversation around the introduction.
Okay, I'm out of time, unfortunately, Premier. I have to go. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Vassie.